It's time for another round of
Pat GPT.
Pat GPT is brought to you by FOMO Sapiens, the podcast for entrepreneurial thinkers. It's the show where I, Patrick J. McGinnis, share some of my own entrepreneurial thinking in the form of inspiration, practical ideas, and knowledge that you can use at work and in your daily life. This week's topic for Pat GPT is Viktor Frankl and his book, Man's Search for Meaning. Now, why am I talking about Viktor Frankl? Viktor Frankl is somebody who's come up so many times on the show. He's somebody who I love the book. I read it right at the outset of, remember the pandemic? We don't talk about the pandemic too often here because, it's triggering. However, I read that book, and to me, it was one of the books that I was like, I wish I had read this book 10, 20 years ago. Why? It is a really good perspective on dealing with adversity and seeing the value in dealing with adversity. And more than that, it also is just a really terrific read. So it's not a long book. I think it's like 115 pages. It took me weeks to get through it because you kind of have to read a couple pages and then sort of digest. It's kind of like cheese. You eat a little cheese. It's very rich and wonderful, but you're not going to have a lot of cheese unless you're Swiss or something. You have to moderate your intake. Same with the Viktor Frankl. And the reason why Viktor Frankl has been so popular among the guests on the show is because there's just a lot of wisdom in that book. A lot of insight, a lot of things that people feel are meaningful in their lives. And so it's just been something I've had in my mind. Now, why am I thinking of it now? Well, I think realistically, because the world feels like it's getting back into the crazy place. Not that we left it. I mean, the world's always got craziness, but with the global events over the last year or two, with political stuff in the US, it just feels a little bit like we've taken another turn into the bad place. And so I refuse to get sucked back into that. And like I did, sort of during the pandemic, like so many of us did. And so I'm thinking about that book as a way of having the right mindset to basically kind of like think of life as a hedge fund. You know how hedge funds, they are long and short different stocks so that they perform well no matter what the market conditions are. Not that that actually happens. Lots of them do horribly when the market is bad, but theoretically they're hedging. I want to have like a hedged mindset in terms of being able to succeed no matter what happens. I want that for all of you. And so I think Viktor Frankl is a really good example of how to actually do that. So we're going to talk about the big takeaways from Viktor Frankl so that you can know about it. You can go read it, but in case you haven't read it yet, or you're not going to read it or whatever, I'm going to give you the key takeaways right after the break.
FOMO.
All right. Number one. At the heart of this book is a philosophy that Viktor Frankl invented, and it's called, I believe it's pronounced logotherapy. Now, why it's called logotherapy, I do not know. But his theory of logotherapy asserts that the pursuit of meaning, not pleasure, not power, is the fundamental motivation in life. Unlike other psychological theories, which focus on resolving past trauma, logotherapy emphasizes finding meaning in the present and the future, right? And there's a quote that I want to read to you from the book that I like that kind of shows this, and it's this. Life is never made unbearable by circumstances, but only by lack of meaning and purpose. Now, why? Well, Viktor Frankl was a survivor of the Holocaust, okay? And that experience informed his worldview. And so even in the darkest times, and by the way, I mean, it's incredible that he was able to come up with this given all that he'd been through. But I guess it was because of that he realized that meaning really is the underpinning. You can always search for meaning, even in the rough times, even in a horrible place like what he had lived through. And so if he can do it, then we can do it if you just have a bad day. Pursuit of power and pleasure, listen, it's tempting. And I'm not saying not to do it sometimes, but meaning is the big one. If you can focus on that, you'll be well positioned. Now, based on that, how do we find meaning? Well, there are three key pathways. Okay. Number one, through creative work, making a podcast. I'm finding so much meaning right now. But really, ideas, art, creative labors, cooking, right? Those things give us meaning. Number two, relationships and love. Not surprising that showed up on the list. And number three, this is the interesting one, through suffering. By enduring hardship with dignity and finding a lesson or purpose in this suffering, Frankl found meaning in the suffering. And, again, he was in a concentration camp and he turned the pain into an opportunity for growth. Now, that is a lot to ask of people, but you see this all the time, that people who have been through really difficult things somehow actually seem to have found deeper meaning in their lives. And this is what he's talking about. There is something in that process of dealing with incredible odds and difficult times and finding that resilience that gives you something. Number three, suffering can be transformed into strength. And this goes back, I guess, to, what we were just talking about. It's like suffering is this pathway to finding meaning. So what he said, having been through this experience in the Holocaust, was that it taught him that while you cannot avoid suffering, we can give it meaning. And that logotherapy helps people reframe suffering as an opportunity for growth, resilience, and self-discovery. The key is to focus on what we can still achieve or contribute despite the pain. And he has this concept in the book, which is tragic optimism, which is the ability to remain hopeful and find meaning in life despite suffering and adversity. It kind of reminds me of, those who listen to the show regularly know I like this concept, post-traumatic growth. That when something bad happens to us, the assumption is like you're here before and you go, I'm doing a gesture with my hands for those listening. You're going down. And then when the trauma or you get better or whatever goes away, you go back to normal. But post-traumatic growth actually says that what happens to you in that process, you come out ahead and you can actually end up being happier. And this is what he's saying in terms of meaning. You can go through a really horrible time, but in the process of dealing you can come out ahead and find deeper meaning in your life. Number four, freedom lies in attitude. So even in the most restrictive and dehumanizing conditions, Frankl observed that people retained the ultimate freedom, which is to choose their response, right? Even if you are a prisoner to an oppressive, horrible, genocidal regime, you are able to still manage your own self and how you react to these things. And so logotherapy emphasizes that, the idea of taking responsibility for freedom and adopting a purposeful attitude. And there's a quote from the book that I really like here. Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. That's a pretty good one. It reminds me a little bit, it's like my brother once told me I was mad at somebody. He said, your only thing you can do that you can control is how you react to this person. I was letting this person set the agenda, but once I decided that I was going to react in my own way, it made a huge difference. So it's kind of like that, but just deeper because we're talking about Frankl here. There's nothing light here. And finally, number five, the biggie, self-transcendence. The notion of self-transcendence that is discussed in this book, living for something greater than yourself, whether it's a cause, a project, or the well-being of another person. He believes that looking beyond your immediate concerns and focusing on these kinds of things can give you deep meaning and fulfillment. Meaning isn't something you invent. It's something you discover around you by engaging in the world. That's what he says. And so for me, it's kind of a blueprint for a better life, if you think about it. You can be caught up in the swirl of day to day, right? Even if, Frankl went through incredible hardship. So, it's ridiculous to compare most people's day to day to that. But, when it's your day to day, it can feel very intense. But if you step back and think about these precepts of logotherapy, looking for meaning in relationships, in creativity, in the suffering, so that you can reapproach life and search for things that give you meaning and get happiness from that. Or happiness is probably the wrong word, contentment, meaning, rather than pursuit of pleasure or power or whatever. You will always be able to look within yourself, no matter where you are, and find those things. So it's a very good philosophy, a really good book, Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl. Check it out. And if you have thoughts, ideas, you can reach out to me. I'm on Blue Sky now, and Instagram and Threads, all at Patrick J. McGinnis. You can find me at Let's Connect at patrickmcginnis.com. We'll be back on Thursday with another episode of FOMO Sapiens. Until then, take care of yourselves, FOMO Sapiens, and Pat GPT, stop generating.
FOMO.
FOMO Sapiens is recorded in New York City. Theme music is by Mike McGinnis, and editing and post-production is by Josh Elstro. If you like today's show, please be sure to rate it and recommend it to your friends. And as always, you can find me at FOMOSapiens.com and at PatrickMcGinnis.com. To advertise on FOMO Sapiens, reach out to contact@FOMOSapiens.com.